The scent of cinnamon and warm apples, a fragrance as comforting and familiar as a well-worn quilt, always greeted Veronica at the threshold of Grandma Heidi's home. Every Sunday, like clockwork, Veronica would push open the slightly creaky front door, a faint chime of bells announcing her arrival, and step into a world steeped in stories and the gentle hum of a life well lived. Sunlight, thick with dust motes dancing, streamed through the lace curtains, illuminating shelves crammed with ceramic figurines, framed photographs of generations past, and stacks of well-loved books. "Veronica, my dear, right on time as always," Heidi's voice, a melodic blend of warmth and a delightful barely there lilt, drifted from the kitchen. Veronica, with her smartphone tucked into her back pocket and the latest podcast paused in her earbuds, smiled. "Wouldn't miss it for the world, Granny." "What tales are we spinning today?" Heidi, a woman in her early 80s whose eyes still sparkled with an undimmed vitality, emerged from the kitchen, wiping flour from her hands onto a floral apron. Her silver hair was neatly pinned, and the faint lines etched around her mouth spoke more of laughter than sorrow. She settled into her favorite armchair, a patchwork quilt draped over its back, while Veronica curled up on the rug at her feet. A mug of steaming chamomile tea nestled in her hands. "Today, my love," Heidi began, her gaze drifting towards a framed photo of a younger, vibrant version of herself at a seaside pier, "I'll tell you about the summer I worked at the old candy shop down by the boardwalk. Oh, the sticky fingers, the sugar rushes, and the time old Mr. Henderson's toupee blew right off his head into a vat of taffy." Veronica chuckled, captivated. Heidi recounted the anecdote with vivid detail and theatrical pauses, painting a picture of mischievous youth, seaside breezes, and the simple joys of a bygone era. She spoke of friendships forged over shared shifts, of penny candy and first paychecks, of dreams that felt as vast and boundless as the ocean itself. But as the story reached its conclusion, Veronica, ever observant, noticed a subtle shift. When Heidi spoke of youthful dreams, of choices made, of the bittersweet passage of time, a faraway look would enter her eyes. It was a flicker of something unspoken, a momentary pause in her otherwise buoyant narrative, like a breath held just a fraction too long. Heidi always brought the conversation back to Grandpa Veronica's kind, steadfast grandfather, who had passed away a decade ago, and their enduring love. But Veronica sensed a deeper well of emotion, a story waiting beneath the surface. "Granny," Veronica probed gently, her voice soft, "you always talk so beautifully about Grandpa and your life together. But was he your first love?" Heidi's smile was small, knowing, and a little sad. She reached out and patted Veronica's knee. "Oh, my dear, in life, we learn that love comes in many forms, and sometimes the first bloom isn't always the one that lasts. Your grandpa was the love that built my life, my rock, my everything." She deflected with practiced ease, eyes twinkling. "Now enough of old stories. Help me with that attic box, will you? I promised myself I'd sort through those old mementos today." Later, the attic air was thick with the scent of aged paper and forgotten dreams. Dust motes danced in the single shaft of light filtering through a grimy window as Veronica helped Heidi pull down a heavy cardboard box from a high shelf. It was filled with an eclectic mix: dried flowers, intricate lace doilies, a child's wooden toy, and a stack of old letters tied with a faded ribbon. As Veronica carefully sifted through the contents, her fingers brushed against something stiff and smooth. She pulled it out, a small sepia-toned photograph, its edges softened by time. It showed a young Heidi, radiant and impossibly beautiful, her laughter caught forever in her eyes. Beside her stood a young man, handsome, with a confident smile and eyes that were strikingly kind, yet held an intense, almost magnetic gaze. He was utterly unfamiliar. Veronica's breath hitched. This was it, the unspoken story. Before she could fully register the image, Heidi's hand moved swiftly, almost instinctively. With a soft gasp, she gently but firmly took the photograph from Veronica's fingers. Her usual cheerful demeanor was replaced by a rare moment of guardedness, her lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes clouded with an emotion Veronica couldn't quite decipher, a mixture of tenderness, regret, and a deeply ingrained pain. Heidi tucked the photograph away, not back into the box, but into the pocket of her apron, a silent, protective gesture. "Just an old friend, dear," Heidi said, her voice a little too quick, a little too light. "From before your grandpa and I met, so many years ago." She didn't offer any more, her attention suddenly consumed by a bundle of yellowed baby clothes. But Veronica wasn't fooled. The fleeting shadow she'd seen earlier now had a face, a name she didn't know, and a history that pulsed with unspoken significance. The intensity in the young man's eyes, the way young Heidi had looked at him, the protective speed of her grandmother's reaction, it all spoke of a secret, a profound story locked away. A new kind of determination sparked within Veronica. Her tech-savvy mind, usually preoccupied with algorithms and trending topics, now focused on a different kind of puzzle. She had a faded photograph, a vague time period, and a grandmother's guarded glance. It wasn't much, but it was enough. She would find out who he was. She would uncover the story behind the kind, intense eyes and the love that had left such an echo in her grandmother's heart. The past, she knew, was never truly silent, especially when it held such a powerful whisper. Summer of first love, the air hummed with the electric buzz of 1,000 summer nights, thick with the scent of spun sugar, sizzling sausages, and the distant, metallic tang of the Ferris wheel turning against a sky bruised purple with twilight. It was the annual Cottonwood Creek Summer Fair, and for 18-year-old Heidi Miller, it was the highlight of her year. Freshly graduated from high school, her spirit was as bright and unfettered as the carnival lights strung between the oak trees. She moved through the crowd with her friends, a cascade of laughter following them, her floral sundress swaying with every buoyant step. They just finished a dizzying ride on the tilt-a-whirl, her head still spinning pleasantly, when she spotted him. He was leaning against a dart-throwing booth, a casual grace in his posture that set him apart from the boisterous crowd. Tall, with a mop of dark, wavy hair that caught the stray lights, and eyes that seemed to hold a quiet intelligence even from a distance. He wore a crisp white shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbows, a stark contrast to the denim and t-shirts around him. He wasn't participating in the game. He was merely observing, a faint, amused smile playing on his lips as his friend, a boisterous, red-faced boy with a booming laugh, repeatedly missed the target. Heidi's gaze lingered a moment too long. Just as her friends tugged her towards the next attraction, he looked up. Their eyes met across the swirling chaos of the fairground. It wasn't a casual glance. It was a sudden, potent connection, like a current arcing between them. A jolt, sharp and undeniable, went through Heidi. He smiled, a slow, genuine curve of his lips that reached his eyes, making them crinkle at the corners. For a breathless second, the world around them faded, the cacophony of the fair muted to a distant hum. Then her friends pulled her onward, and the spell broke, leaving a tingling warmth in its wake. Later that evening, as the local band struck up a lively rockabilly tune in the dance tent, fate intervened. Heidi, flushed from a particularly energetic twist, found herself catching her breath by the edge of the floor. That's when he appeared beside her, his presence a quiet hum. "You've got a real knack for that," he said, his voice a low, warm baritone that sent a shiver down her spine. "My name's Barry Hawthorne." Heidi felt her cheeks warm. "Heidi Miller, and you're not bad yourself, Mr. Hawthorne, for someone who only observes." He chuckled, a rich, full sound. "I was waiting for the right partner, may I?" He extended a hand, his touch surprisingly gentle as he led her back to the dance floor. From that moment, the summer became a symphony of stolen glances, shared laughter, and an undeniable, burgeoning love. Barry Hawthorne was everything Heidi had ever dreamed of and more. He was intelligent, capable of discussing everything from the latest scientific discoveries to classic literature, yet also possessed a playful wit that kept her constantly smiling. They spent hours talking, sitting on the riverbank as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues. He listened with an intensity that made her feel truly seen, truly heard, for the first time. Their dates were a whirlwind of youthful romance. Barry would pick her up in his family's sleek, polished Ford Fairlane, its chrome gleaming like a promise. They'd drive to secluded spots, the windows down, the wind whipping through her hair as they sang along to the radio. Picnics by the whispering Cottonwood Creek became their sanctuary, where sandwiches and lemonade tasted like ambrosia, and their hands would brush, sending sparks through Heidi's veins. He'd point out constellations during stargazing nights on a quiet hill overlooking the town, his arm casually draped around her, his voice a soothing murmur as he told her stories of the stars. Under the vast, inky canvas of the night sky, their world felt infinite and perfect, their love an invincible force. Stolen kisses, became a cherished ritual, quick, breathless brushes of lips behind the abandoned mill, lingering. Passionate embraces beneath the dappled moonlight of the town square's ancient oak. Each touch, each glance, each shared secret solidified their bond. Heidi had never felt such an intense, all-consuming passion. She knew with every fiber of her being that this was it. This was forever. Yet a subtle thread of difference wove through their idyllic romance, one that Heidi initially dismissed as merely another charming facet of Barry. He lived in the grandest house on Elm Street, a sprawling colonial with manicured lawns and a staff of gardeners who seemed to work around the clock. His father, Mr. Hawthorne, owned half the businesses in Cottonwood Creek, his name synonymous with prosperity and influence. Heidi, on the other hand, lived in a cozy, but decidedly modest, bungalow on Maple Avenue, her father a hard-working mechanic, her mother a seamstress. Barry never made her feel less than, never mentioned the disparity. He was always respectful, always eager to meet her family, charming her mother with his polite manners and her father with his genuine interest in car engines. He painted their differences as exciting, a blend of two worlds that would only make their own stronger. Heidi, swept up in the intoxicating rush of first love, believed him. Why wouldn't she? Their connection was too real, too powerful, to be constrained by something as trivial as money or social standing. One breezy Saturday afternoon, they were walking hand in hand through the town square, ice cream cones melting in the summer heat, their laughter echoing off the brick storefronts. They were completely engrossed in each other, planning their next adventure, a drive to the coast, a day trip to a hidden waterfall. Suddenly, Barry's hand tightened in hers. Heidi followed his gaze. Standing outside the elegant dress shop, conversing with a meticulously dressed woman, was Mrs. Hawthorne, Barry's mother. Her eyes, cool and sharp, zeroed in on them. A flicker of surprise, then an unmistakable tightening of her lips. A subtle but deeply disapproving frown creased her forehead. She quickly turned her head, dismissing them with a pointed lack of acknowledgement, pulling her companion into the shop. Heidi felt a cold prickle of unease. The warmth of the afternoon seemed to dim. Barry, ever the optimist, squeezed her hand reassuringly. "Don't mind her, sweetheart, she's just particular." He offered a confident smile, though Heidi noticed a slight tension in his jaw. "Our love is stronger than any silly notions about who should be with whom. She'll come around, they all will." Heidi wanted to believe him. She did believe him, or at least she tried with all her might. She looked into his earnest, kind eyes and the world righted itself. He was right. Their love was too powerful. It would conquer all. The fleeting shadow of disapproval was just that, a shadow, easily banished by the dazzling light of their boundless, perfect summer love. The crisp, golden days of late summer had given way to the biting winds and skeletal trees of autumn, mirroring the chill that had settled over Heidi and Barry's once invincible world. The initial, veiled disapproval from the Hawthorne matriarch had blossomed into an icy, undeniable barrier, now actively enforced by Mr. Reginald Hawthorne himself. His presence was as imposing as the mahogany desk in his sprawling study, where Barry now found himself summoned with increasing frequency, the heavy oak door clicking shut like a vault. "Barry, we need to speak plainly," his father had begun, his voice a low rumble that always felt more like a verdict than a conversation. Outside the leaded glass windows, the manicured lawns stretched endlessly, a testament to the family's enduring wealth. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of aged leather and unyielding expectation. This infatuation with Miss Heidi Peterson, it must end. Barry's jaw tightened, a familiar knot forming in his stomach. "It's not an infatuation, father, it's love." Mr. Hawthorne merely scoffed, a dry, dismissive sound. "Love is a luxury we cannot afford when the future of Hawthorne Industries is at stake. You are a Hawthorne, Barry. Your responsibilities are paramount. We have an agreement with the Smythe-Jones family. Elaine is a suitable match, a brilliant young woman from an impeccable background. Her family's connections will secure our position for generations." The words struck Barry like physical blows. Elaine, he barely knew her, a pretty, poised girl whose conversations revolved around debutante balls and country club gossip. He tried to argue, to plead, to explain the vibrant, intelligent, utterly captivating woman that Heidi was, but his father's eyes, cold and unyielding, saw only a working-class girl, a distraction, a threat to their carefully constructed dynasty. "You will marry Elaine, Mr. Hawthorne stated, his voice devoid of emotion, or you will find yourself without a penny, without a position, and without a family name to claim. This is not a request, Barry. It is a decision." The threat hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Disinheritance, cutting him off. The unthinkable. Barry stormed out, the polished corridors of his family home feeling less like a sanctuary and more like a gilded cage. He saw his mother later that day, her face etched with a silent, complicit sorrow. "Your father knows best, dear," she murmured, her gaze flitting to the priceless porcelain figurines on the mantelpiece, as if seeking solace in their fragile beauty. "It's for your own good, for the family." Heidi, meanwhile, felt the shift in the town's subtle currents. Mrs. Hawthorne, once merely cool, now looked through her as if she were made of glass. Whispers followed her in the market, sidelong glances from women who once smiled. She saw the strain on Barry's face, the shadows beneath his usually bright eyes, the way his hand trembled when he held hers. One evening, after a particularly tense encounter, where Mrs. Hawthorne had pointedly introduced Barry to Elaine right in front of Heidi at the town's annual autumn festival, Heidi's doubts solidified into a cold fear. She stood on the edge of the crowd, watching Barry, elegant and undeniably handsome, being pulled into the orbit of his family and their expectations. She was an outsider, always would be. Was her love enough to fight this juggernaut? Could she ever truly belong in his world, or would she forever be the cause of his misery? A few days later, Barry appeared at her small cottage door, the late afternoon sun casting long, weary shadows behind him. His usual buoyant energy was gone, replaced by a profound weariness that broke Heidi's heart. He didn't even wait to be invited in, slumping onto the worn settee, burying his face in his hands. "Heidi," he choked out, his voice thick with unshed tears, "they're going to cut me off, completely. They'll disown me. They've already started making arrangements with the Smythe Joneses. They'll force me to marry Elaine." His shoulders shook with silent sobs, a sight Heidi had never witnessed in the strong, confident man she loved. Heidi knelt before him, her own heart aching with a pain that felt too big for her chest. The sting of the Hawthorne's judgment, the feeling of not being good enough, sharpened into a cruel blade. She gently touched his arm, her own fear warring with a fierce protectiveness. "Oh, Barry," she whispered, tears stinging her eyes. "What can we do?" He looked up, his eyes red-rimmed, but suddenly alight with a desperate, wild hope. "We run," he said, his voice gaining a fragile strength. "We leave, we go somewhere they can't find us, somewhere we can be just Heidi and Barry. We start over completely free." Heidi's breath caught. Run away. It was a terrifying thought, a leap into the unknown, leaving behind everything familiar. But then she looked at Barry, at the raw anguish in his eyes, at the desperate hope clinging to his words. Her love for him, fierce and unwavering, drowned out her fear. She would follow him anywhere. "Yes," she breathed, her hand finding his, gripping it tightly. "Yes, Barry, let's run." From that moment, their lives became a clandestine ballet of whispered plans and stolen moments. They meticulously charted their escape, poring over maps of distant towns Barry had heard about, places where no one knew the Hawthornes, where a young couple could simply disappear and begin anew. They decided on a specific date, 3 weeks hence, under the cloak of a new moon. Their meeting spot would be the old, abandoned train station just outside of town, a derelict relic of a bygone era, its tracks overgrown, its platform crumbling. It was a place where journeys ended, but for them, it would be where a new one began. Heidi secretly saved what little money she could, mending her best dress, packing a small, sturdy valise with only the essentials. Barry, too, made his own quiet preparations, his movements hushed, his words carefully chosen. The tension in the air was electric, a mixture of exhilarating hope and bone-deep terror. Every shared glance, every stolen kiss, was charged with the weight of their momentous decision. They were risking everything, but for the first time in months, a fragile, defiant flicker of their old joy returned, fueled by the desperate dream of a future where their love was the only expectation that mattered. The first sliver of dawn, pale and tentative, crept through Heidi's window, painting the familiar room in shades of gray. But inside her, a kaleidoscope of emotions spun wildly, terror, raw and visceral, battling a dazzling, almost blinding hope. Today was the day. The air thrummed with the unspoken magnitude of it, a secret so vast it felt like a third presence in the quiet house. She moved with hushed urgency, her bare feet silent on the cold wooden floor. Her small valise, already packed the night before, sat by the door, a few changes of clothes, a worn photo of her mother, a book of poetry Barry had given her. Each item felt like a feather against the immense weight of her decision. She found a scrap of paper and a stubby pencil, her hand trembling as she wrote a note, deliberately vague, for her family. "Dearest Mama, Papa, I must go. Don't worry. I love you, Heidi." She folded it carefully, tucking it under the salt shaker on the kitchen table. A silent plea for understanding she knew wouldn't come easily. The walk to the old, abandoned train station was a blur of nervous energy. The town was still asleep, bathed in the soft, hopeful glow of early morning. Each step felt like a drumbeat against the silence, propelling her towards a future she could barely imagine, yet yearned for with every fiber of her being. The station, a skeletal remains of its former glory, stood desolate and quiet. Its peeling paint and broken windows a testament to forgotten journeys. It was perfect, a place of beginnings and endings, waiting for their own new departure. Heidi arrived early, exactly as they had planned. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. She found their designated bench, half hidden by overgrown weeds, and sat, clutching her valise like a lifeline. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and distant wood smoke. A faint, hopeful birdsong pierced the quiet. She imagined Barry's car pulling up, his familiar smile, the relief flooding her as he took her hand. Minutes crawled by, each tick of her internal clock a sharp, anxious jab. She checked her watch then again. The sun climbed higher, painting the eastern sky in glorious hues of orange and pink. Still no Barry. The initial excitement, vibrant and intoxicating, began to curdle into confusion. Had he been delayed? Perhaps his parents had suspected something. Her mind raced, conjuring a dozen innocent reasons for his tardiness. She stood, walked to the edge of the platform, peered down the long, empty road. Nothing. The hopeful warmth of the morning began to fade, replaced by a growing chill in the air, a subtle shift in the light as clouds began to gather overhead. An hour passed. Then two. The birdsong grew distant, replaced by the restless rustle of leaves in a burgeoning breeze. The optimistic sun retreated behind a heavy shroud of grey. A cold drizzle began to fall, fine at first, then thickening, turning the dust on the platform into dark, weeping streaks. Heidi shivered, pulling her thin cardigan tighter, but it was not the cold that truly pierced her. It was the gnawing worry, the insidious tendrils of doubt that began to wrap around her heart. He wasn't coming. The thought, once unthinkable, now echoed in her mind with terrifying clarity. He had chosen his family. He had chosen his wealth, his comfortable life, his name. He had chosen them over her. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow, stealing her breath, leaving her hollow and numb. The deep, personal betrayal she felt was overwhelming, a poison seeping into every pore. She had risked everything, her family, her reputation, her entire future for him, for them, and he had simply abandoned her. The rain intensified, plastering strands of hair to her cold, tear-streaked face. She didn't bother to wipe them away. What was the point? The tears were just another part of the deluge, inside and out. Humiliation burned through her, a hot, searing shame that made her want to curl into a ball and disappear. She was a fool, a naive, hopeful girl who had believed in a love that couldn't possibly exist in a world so cruel. Eventually, her legs aching, her spirit utterly crushed, Heidi rose. The valise felt impossibly heavy in her hand, a mocking symbol of a journey that would never begin. She walked back towards town, each step a leaden testament to her broken heart. The familiar streets, once filled with the promise of a new day, now seemed indifferent, even scornful. The world had continued without her, uncaring of the monumental devastation within her. She stumbled through the back door of her home, soaked to the bone, her face a mask of profound despair. Her mother, hearing her enter, emerged from the kitchen, her eyes immediately falling on the untouched note, then on Heidi's ravaged appearance. The unspoken questions hung heavy in the air, but Heidi couldn't answer. She couldn't speak, couldn't explain. The words caught in her throat, choked by the bitterness and the crushing weight of her perceived betrayal. Her family gathered around her, their faces etched with worry and confusion. They tried to comfort her, but their words were distant, muffled by the roaring emptiness inside. All she could feel was the gaping wound where her heart used to be, the searing pain of a love that had promised everything and delivered nothing but agonizing abandonment. Later that afternoon, as a gray twilight settled over the town, the faint, tinny sound of the radio from the kitchen drifted into Heidi's room. A local news report, crackling with static, mentioned a serious car accident on the old county road, just outside town. a young man from a prominent family critically injured. But Heidi, curled in a tight ball on her bed, her face buried in a pillow, was too consumed by her own profound grief and the searing pain of betrayal to truly register the words. The world had ended for her today. What difference did anything else make? He had chosen his life, and she was left to pick up the pieces of her own, shattered beyond recognition. Heidi's world, once vibrant with the promise of a shared future, had collapsed into a monochrome of despair. The humiliation of that day, the endless weight, the growing certainty of abandonment, was a brand on her soul. For weeks, the scent of her mother's worried cooking was a dull background to the fog in her mind. Sleep offered no escape, only fractured dreams where Barry was always just out of reach, his face shadowed, his words unheard. She tried to erase him. She burned the few letters he'd written, the small pressed flower he'd once given her. She even cut a lock from her hair, a foolish, superstitious act to sever the connection, as if snipping away a part of herself could erase the memory of his touch, his laugh, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. But the ghost of Barry lingered, a constant ache beneath her ribs, a phantom limb of a love lost. Every song on the radio seemed to mock her, every couple she saw on the street a cruel reminder of what she'd believed was hers. Her usually bright spirit was dimmed, replaced by a quiet, simmering anger that she rarely expressed, even to herself. Her family, witnessing her profound sorrow, encouraged her to seek a change of scenery. The town, once a tableau of happy memories, was now a constant trigger. Every street corner whispered his name, every familiar face seemed to hold a hint of pity or unspoken gossip. One crisp autumn morning, with a heavy heart but a fierce resolve, Heidi packed a single suitcase and boarded a bus for a town 2 counties over. She found work as a clerk in a bustling department store, the constant rhythm of sales and customer service a welcome distraction. Slowly, painstakingly, she began to weave a new life, thread by thread. New friends, kind and oblivious to her past, offered companionship and laughter, helping to mend the ragged edges of her broken heart. It was at a local community dance, nearly 3 years after the fateful day that she met Arthur. He wasn't the fiery, passionate whirlwind that Barry had been. Arthur was steady, like a deep, calm river. He had kind eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled, a gentle humor, and a quiet strength that felt like a balm to her still tender spirit. He was a carpenter, his hands strong and capable, his words thoughtful and true. Their courtship was a slow, gentle unfolding. He didn't sweep her off her feet with grand gestures, but with consistent kindness, thoughtful conversations, and an unwavering presence. He listened more than he spoke, and when he did speak, it was with genuine interest in her thoughts and dreams. Heidi found herself drawn to his stability, the comforting predictability of his affection. There was a quiet security in Arthur's love, a stark contrast to the exhilarating, yet ultimately devastating, intensity of her first romance. She learned to love him deeply, truly, a love built on respect, shared values, and a profound sense of belonging. It was a love that didn't demand to consume her, but rather embraced her, flaws and all, offering a safe harbor after the storm. They married in a small, intimate ceremony, and soon their cozy home was filled with the joyful chaos of children. Heidi threw herself into motherhood, into creating a warm, loving household, into her community. She found immense happiness in her family, in watching her children grow, in the steady companionship of Arthur. She built a fulfilling life, rich with laughter, small triumphs, and the quiet contentment of everyday joys. She considered herself blessed, yet sometimes in the quiet hours after the children were asleep, or when a particular scent or song drifted through the air, a shadow would stir. A fleeting image of Barry's face, a whisper of his name, a phantom ache for the what-if. She never spoke of it, not to Arthur, not to anyone. It was a secret chamber in her heart, not one of regret for her life with Arthur, but of an unresolved question, a wound that had scarred over but never quite vanished. Once, years after she had left her hometown, she saw a small article in a regional newspaper, a brief mention of the Hawthorne family's continued philanthropic endeavors, their business expanding. The name, Barry Hawthorne, was there, listed as a rising star in the family enterprise. A pang, sharp and swift, went through her. It confirmed her long-held belief. He had chosen that life. He had chosen wealth and status over her. The ache deepened, solidifying the narrative she had constructed, the one that allowed her to move forward. She had been abandoned, forgotten. And that, my dear Veronica, Grandma Heidi said, her voice softening, pulling Veronica back from her attentive reverie. Is how your grandpa Arthur convinced me that a woman truly needs a proper pantry, not just a cupboard. She chuckled, a warm, familiar sound that crinkled the corners of her eyes. Veronica smiled, but her gaze lingered on Heidi. Her grandmother's face, etched with the beautiful lines of a life well lived, held a flicker of something more than just fond remembrance. There was a subtle wistfulness, a distant quality that Veronica had come to recognize. Heidi had just finished recounting a charming anecdote about her early married life with Arthur, a story filled with love and warmth. Yet Veronica sensed the unspoken words, the quiet spaces between the sentences where another narrative might reside. Later that evening, after Veronica had helped clear the supper dishes and was about to leave, she paused at the doorway of Heidi's study. The light was dim, but she saw her grandmother, not quite realizing she was being observed. Sitting by the window, in her lap she held the faded, sepia-toned photograph Veronica had discovered in the attic box, the one of young Heidi and the unknown man. Heidi's gaze was distant, thoughtful, her thumb gently tracing the outline of the young man's face. It was a private moment, one that Veronica quietly retreated from. The image of her grandmother, lost in that silent communion with a forgotten past, solidified Veronica's resolve. The what-if wasn't just Heidi's. It was becoming Veronica's too. She knew with a certainty that hummed in her bones that there was more to this story, a chapter left unread, and she was determined to find it. The digital detective. Veronica's apartment, usually a vibrant chaos of textbooks, art supplies, and half-finished coding projects, felt unusually quiet that Monday evening. The lingering scent of her grandmother's apple pie, a phantom trace from Sunday, seemed to mock the stillness. The faded sepia photograph, now carefully propped against her laptop screen, was the only thing holding her attention. Young Heidi, radiant and full of life, stood beside a handsome, unknown young man whose eyes, even in the grainy image, held a captivating intensity. The memory of her grandmother's fleeting shadow, the way she'd almost snatched the photo, had sparked a persistent hum of curiosity in Veronica's mind, a melody she couldn't ignore. Her fingers, usually flying across her keyboard with the practiced ease of a digital native, hovered uncertainly. Where did one even begin to search for a ghost from the late 1950s? She started with local historical society websites, meticulously sifting through digitized yearbooks and community newsletters from Heidi's hometown. Names, faces, events flashed across her screen, but nothing resonated. The town was small enough that a prominent family, especially one that could inspire such a powerful, unspoken story, should have left a digital footprint. Yet, Hawthorne, the name that had instinctively whispered itself into her mind, yielded no immediate results connected to a young man named Barry. Dead ends piled up like discarded drafts of code. Hours bled into late evening. The glow of the screen painted her face in cool blues and greens as she refined her search terms, adding dates, narrowing geographical parameters. She tried variations of Barry Hawthorne, Heidi grandma's maiden name, and Hawthorne, even town name, wealthy family. Frustration began to prickle. Had she imagined the intensity in her grandmother's eyes? Was this just a fleeting crush, blown out of proportion by her own romantic imagination? She leaned back, rubbing her temples, her gaze falling back on the photograph. Those eyes, they weren't just handsome. They held a kindness, a depth that suggested more than a casual acquaintance, and Heidi's reaction that wasn't for a forgotten fling. There was a story here, a significant one, and Veronica felt an insistent pull to uncover it. A new strategy formed. If traditional archives were failing, perhaps the people themselves had eventually found their way onto modern platforms. It was a long shot, given the era, but worth a try. She opened Facebook, a digital ocean where countless lives, past and present, converged. She typed Barry Hawthorne into the search bar, adding the approximate age range 80s and the old hometown. The initial results were a jumble of distant relatives, businesses, and unrelated individuals. She scrolled, her heart a dull thud against her ribs. Then halfway down the third page, a small circular profile picture caught her eye. An older man, distinguished with silver hair neatly combed back from a high forehead. His features were softened by age, etched with lines that spoke of experience and perhaps a quiet sadness. But the eyes, Veronica gasped, leaning closer to the screen, her breath catching in her throat. Those eyes, they were undeniably the same. The same kind, intense gaze that had captivated young Heidi in the sepia photograph. It was him, Barry. Her fingers trembled as she clicked on the profile. The name, Barry Hawthorne, confirmed it. She scanned the public information. His hometown matched. His professional life clearly successful, just as Heidi had always believed it would be for the wealthy Hawthorne family. And then, a detail that made her stomach clench with a mix of sorrow and revelation. Widowed. A wave of emotions crashed over Veronica. Excitement, yes, a thrill of having solved a mystery, but also a profound sense of awe and apprehension. This wasn't just a historical curiosity. This was real asterisk. This was her grandmother's lost love. Still alive, still carrying those familiar eyes, and also, like Heidi, a widower. The universe, it seemed, had a darkly poetic sense of timing. The thrill quickly gave way to a knot of ethical conflict in her chest. Should she tell Heidi? Her grandmother had built a beautiful, fulfilling life with Grandpa, a man she loved deeply. What right did Veronica have to dredge up a past that clearly held pain, a past Heidi had chosen to keep hidden? What if seeing Barry, knowing he was alive and widowed, brought back an unbearable ache, a torment of what-ifs that Heidi had long since buried? What if it overshadowed the precious memories of her life with Grandpa? Her mind raced, presenting arguments and counter-arguments in a furious internal debate. Asterisk, but what if it brings closure? Asterisk, a voice whispered. Asterisk, what if it's a chance for her to finally understand what really happened, to release the burden of a perceived betrayal? Asterisk, the photograph flashed in her mind again, Heidi's guardedness, that fleeting shadow. It wasn't just pain, it was asterisk unresolved asterisk pain, a question mark that had hung over her grandmother's life for decades. Veronica closed her laptop, plunging her room into relative darkness, hoping to quell the storm of her thoughts. She walked to her window, looking out at the city lights, but saw only Heidi's face, both young and old. Her grandmother deserved the truth, didn't she? And perhaps, just perhaps, she deserved a chance at something more. A chance at understanding, at peace, or even a second chapter. The decision solidified slowly like concrete setting. The profound curiosity she felt was intertwined with a deeper, more powerful desire to see her beloved grandmother truly at peace, unburdened by the ghost of a lost love. Yes, she had to tell her. But how? This wasn't a casual piece of gossip. This was a bombshell, a revelation that could shake the foundations of Heidi's carefully constructed emotional world. She would need to be gentle, cautious, to present the information with immense sensitivity. She rehearsed scenarios in her head. Granny, I found someone, or remember that photo, I think I found him. Each felt inadequate, too abrupt, too loaded. She opened her laptop again, her fingers hovering over the message button on Barry Hawthorne's profile. No, not yet. Not directly. She needed to tell Heidi first, to gauge her reaction, to give her control over this monumental rediscovery. But the thought, the possibility of reaching out, of bridging 60 years with a single click, was exhilarating and terrifying. Veronica took a deep, steadying breath. Her course was set. The digital detective had found her target. Now the real human challenge began. She closed the laptop, the faint glow of the screen reflecting the determined yet apprehensive light in her eyes. The tale was indeed old, but it was far from over. The aroma of vanilla and cinnamon usually filled Grandma Heidi's kitchen on Sundays, a comforting balm that spoke of decades of warmth and tradition. Today, however, the air felt thin, charged with an unfamiliar electricity. Veronica sat opposite her grandmother at the scrubbed pine table, a laptop open between them, its screen glowing with the stark, undeniable reality of a Facebook profile. Heidi, usually so animated, was utterly still, her hands clasped tightly on the table, knuckles white. Her gaze was fixed on the image, an old man with silver hair combed neatly back, lines etched around kind, intense eyes that were achingly familiar. He wore a tweed jacket, and a quiet sadness seemed to cling to his distinguished features. "It's him, Granny," Veronica murmured, her voice soft, almost a whisper. "Barry Hawthorne, he's a widower like you." Heidi didn't respond immediately. A gasp, sharp and involuntary, had escaped her lips when Veronica had first angled the screen. Now a profound stillness had descended, as if the very air had been sucked from the room. Her usually rosy cheeks had paled, and her breath, when it finally came, was a shallow, trembling thing. Veronica watched a kaleidoscope of emotions flicker across her grandmother's face, disbelief warring with a sudden, devastating pang of recognition, a flicker of old, forgotten anger quickly doused by an overwhelming wave of sorrow for what had been lost. Then beneath it all, a deep magnetic pull, a desperate need to know. After all these years, Heidi finally breathed, her voice raspy, barely audible. She reached out a hesitant, trembling finger, tracing the outline of the aged face on the screen. He looks so much older, but those eyes, a tear unbidden tracked a path down her cheek. I thought he just chose them. He's a widower, Granny, Veronica repeated gently, her hand reaching across to cover Heidi's. He's lived a whole life just like you. Maybe there's a reason he never came. Maybe it wasn't what you thought. She squeezed her grandmother's hand. Don't you want to know? Even if it's just for closure, to finally understand. Heidi closed her eyes, a lifetime of suppressed grief and unanswered questions surging to the surface. The pain of that day 60 years ago felt as raw as if it had happened yesterday, but alongside it, a fragile, terrifying hope had begun to bloom. What if it hurts more? She whispered, her eyes still closed. What if it doesn't? Veronica countered, her voice firm but gentle. What if it brings you peace? Even a new beginning. Heidi opened her eyes, looking at Veronica, then back at the screen. The conflict was etched on her face, but the pull of the past, of the man who had been her first fierce love, was undeniable. She nodded, a slow, almost imperceptible movement. All right, she whispered. All right, my dear. Asterisk. Veronica's message to Barry Hawthorne was carefully crafted, respectful, and discreet. It spoke of a mutual acquaintance from their youth, someone who remembered him fondly and wondered if he might be open to a brief, casual coffee meeting. Barry, equally surprised by the unexpected outreach after so many decades, and perhaps carrying his own silent questions, agreed. The coffee shop on Main Street was a study in controlled chaos. The hiss of the espresso machine, the clatter of ceramic, the low hum of conversations, all blended into a symphony of urban life. Heidi, dressed in her best Sunday dress, felt a flutter of nerves she hadn't experienced since she was 18. Veronica sat beside her, a steady anchor in the swirling apprehension. He's here, Granny, Veronica whispered, nodding towards the entrance. Heidi's gaze snapped up, following Veronica's cue, and there he was. Time, the relentless sculptor, had carved new lines into his face, dusted his hair with silver, and perhaps stooped his shoulders a fraction. But the way he carried himself, the quiet dignity, the thoughtful intensity in his eyes, it was undeniably Barry. He paused at the entrance, scanning the room, and for a moment his eyes met hers. 60 years evaporated. The bustling coffee shop faded. It was just Heidi and Barry, two souls recognizing each other across an impossible chasm of time. A wave of heat rushed through Heidi, followed by a chill. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of anticipation and fear. He began to walk towards them. His pace measured. Heidi felt her throat tighten, a lump forming that made speech impossible. As he reached their table, he extended a hand, his touch hesitant, almost reverent, as he gently took hers. Heidi, his voice was deeper, richer than she remembered, but the underlying timbre was the same. It was a sound that had once promised forever. Barry, she managed, her voice a thin thread. They sat down, the small table suddenly feeling vast. Veronica, sensing the profound weight of the moment, slipped away to order their coffees, leaving them in a bubble of almost unbearable tension. The first few minutes were a delicate dance around the edges of their shared history. It's been a long time, Barry, Heidi offered, her gaze fixed on the steam rising from her untouched cup. A very long time, Heidi, he replied, his voice laced with a quiet sadness. You look, well, and you, she managed, finally meeting his eyes. They were still kind, still intense, but now held a weary wisdom she hadn't seen in the young man she remembered. The conversation, when it finally flowed, was a polite, almost superficial exchange of life's milestones. They spoke of their children, their grandchildren, their careers. Heidi mentioned her late husband, a kind and steady man. Barry, in turn, spoke of Elaine, his deceased wife, with a gentle respect. It was in these shared acknowledgments of loss, of lives lived and loved, that a fragile bridge began to form. They found common ground in their widowhood, a quiet understanding passing between them, a shared experience of grief that transcended the decades. Yet beneath the polite veneer, the unspoken history hung heavy and palpable, a third presence at their small table. Every glance, every pause, every carefully chosen word was laden with the weight of that fateful day, the question of what had truly happened, and the lifetime they had missed. Heidi observed the slight tremor in his hand as he lifted his coffee cup, the lingering sadness in his eyes. He, in turn, noticed the resilience in her posture, the enduring spark in her gaze, despite the lines of age. As the coffee grew cold, a sense of cautious hope mingled with the bittersweet recognition. The initial awkwardness had softened, replaced by a profound curiosity. Barry finally broke the silence, his voice softer, more direct. "Heidi," he began, eyes searching hers, this isn't enough, is it? We have so much to talk about, so much to understand." He paused, then suggested, "Perhaps we could meet again, somewhere quieter where we can truly talk." Heidi looked at him, her heart aching with a mixture of fear and an undeniable yearning. The decades of pain, the perceived betrayal still lingered, a phantom limb of her past. But the man across from her, with his kind, sad eyes, offered a glimpse of a different truth. She took a deep, trembling breath, a lifetime of questions poised on the brink of revelation. "Yes, Barry," she said, her voice stronger now, a fragile hope taking root in her heart. "I'd like that very much." The scent of Earl Grey tea and the faint, familiar aroma of Heidi's lavender sachet filled the air in her living room. The afternoon light, filtered through lace curtains, cast a soft, forgiving glow on the worn Persian rug and the comfortable armchair where Barry sat. Heidi occupied her usual spot on the sofa, a delicate teacup cradled in her trembling hands. The small table between them, usually laden with biscuits, held only the teapot and two untouched cups, a silent testament to the gravity of their meeting. There was no polite small talk today. The air hummed with an unspoken agreement, a mutual recognition that the carefully constructed pleasantries of their last encounter had served their purpose. Now it was time for the truth. Barry cleared his throat, a sound rough with age and emotion. His gaze, still as kind and intense as Heidi remembered from 60 years ago, held a deep well of regret. "Heidi," he began, his voice a low rumble, "there's something I need to tell you, something I should have told you decades ago, but there was no way." Heidi nodded slowly, her heart thudding in a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She braced herself, a lifetime of questions poised to either shatter or heal her. She had lived with the phantom ache of betrayal for so long that the idea of an alternative truth felt both terrifying and intoxicating. Barry took a deep breath, his eyes momentarily losing focus, as if peering into a distant, painful memory. "That day," he started, his voice barely a whisper, "the day we were supposed to meet at the old train station, I never made it." Heidi's breath hitched. "I waited, Barry," she said, the words escaping before she could stop them. Raw echo of her youthful pain. "I waited for hours. I thought you'd chosen them, your family, your life." Her voice cracked on the last word. Barry flinched, a spasm of anguish crossing his face. "I know you did, my dear, and I wouldn't blame you for thinking that, but that's not what happened." He leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. "I was on my way. I was so full of hope, so terrified, but so sure of us. I was driving down Old Miller's Road. Just past the turnoff for the creaky," he paused, a shiver running through his frame. "A truck came out of nowhere, a drunk driver, they said later. I swerved, tried to avoid it, but it was too late." His voice dropped, thick with remembered pain. "The next thing I knew, I was waking up in a hospital bed, my body a broken mess, my mind a fog." Heidi gasped, a hand flying to her mouth. The teacup clattered against its saucer. The world tilted on its axis. "A car accident. Not a choice. It was severe," Barry continued, his gaze fixed on some point beyond Heidi, reliving the nightmare. "Multiple fractures, internal injuries. I was in a coma for weeks. When I finally came to, I couldn't move, couldn't speak properly. It was 2 years, Heidi. 2 years of hospitals, surgeries, and painful rehabilitation. My parents, they kept me under lock and key almost. They saw it as God's will, a chance to correct my path." His voice hardened with a bitter edge. "They controlled everything, visitors, information. They told me nothing about you, and I was too weak to ask, too confused." Heidi was shaking, tears silently streaming down her face. 2 years of agony, while she believed he had simply abandoned her. The enormity of the misunderstanding was a physical weight, pressing down on her chest. "As soon as I was well enough," Barry went on, his voice regaining strength. "The first thing I did, the only thing I wanted to do, was find you. I went to your old house. Your family had moved. I asked around, mutual friends, anyone who might know. But it was a different time, Heidi. No phones for everyone, no internet, no easy way to track people down once they left town. It was like you'd vanished." He looked at her then, his eyes brimming with unshed tears. I searched for months, years even, but I couldn't find you. I started to believe, I had to believe you'd moved on, that you'd found someone else, that you'd forgotten me, just as I'd been forced to forget the future we'd planned." He swallowed hard. "My parents, of course, used that time to push Elaine. They said it was my duty for the family, for the business. I was emotionally exhausted, broken. I had no fight left in me. I married her, Heidi. I built a life. I had children, grandchildren, a career, and I loved Elaine, truly. In my own way, she was a good woman, a kind woman. But a piece of my heart, the part that belonged to that hopeful boy at the train station, always wondered about you." Heidi was openly weeping now, not just for herself, but for him, for the young man whose life had been derailed, whose love had been silenced by a cruel twist of fate and the tyranny of circumstance. Her long-held anger, the bitterness that had been a constant companion, dissolved into a profound, aching sorrow. It wasn't betrayal, it was tragedy, a monstrous, life-altering misunderstanding born of a time without easy communication. I didn't know," Heidi choked out, her voice raw. "I heard about an accident vaguely, but I was so consumed by my own pain. I thought you'd made your choice. I thought I wasn't enough." Barry reached across the small table, his hand trembling as it covered hers. His touch was warm, gentle, and utterly familiar. "You were my everything," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You were the only choice, and I lost you. We lost each other because of a moment, a terrible accident, and the lack of a simple telephone call." They sat there, hands clasped, the decades of unspoken pain and misunderstanding finally bursting forth in a torrent of shared tears. The relief was immense, a cathartic flood washing away years of resentment and unanswered questions. But with it came an equally immense grief for the lost kisses, the unshared dreams, the lifetime together that had been stolen from them by a cruel twist of fate. "All those years," Heidi murmured, her voice barely audible, "all those what-ifs, they were real." Barry squeezed her hand. "They were, my dear, and they still are, but now at least we know the truth, and knowing the truth, even if it's painful, is a start." The setting sun cast long shadows across the room, painting the scene in hues of orange and purple. The silence that followed was different now, not tense or burdened, but heavy with the weight of revelation, understanding, and a profound, shared sorrow for a love that had been tragically, unjustly lost. The revelation of Barry's accident had cleaved through 60 years of Heidi's carefully constructed understanding, leaving her heart a landscape of both devastation and profound, aching relief. The initial tempest of grief for what was lost had begun to subside, replaced by a quieter, yet no less powerful, current of rediscovery. Heidi and Barry now moved through their days with a shared purpose, to bridge the vast chasm of time that had separated them. Their meetings, once tentative and fraught with the weight of the unsaid, had become a comforting ritual. Veronica, a silent, beaming architect of this delicate reunion, would often observe her grandmother before and after Barry's visits, noting the renewed sparkle in Heidi's eyes, the almost imperceptible lift in her shoulders. One crisp autumn afternoon, they found themselves by the winding river that bordered their old hometown. The ancient oak where they'd carved their initials, now long swallowed by bark, still stood, a gnarled sentinel. The meadow where they'd picnicked, once a riot of wildflowers, was now a neatly mown park, but the sunlight still dappled through the leaves in the same timeless pattern. "Remember that terrible time the ants invaded our picnic?" Heidi chuckled, her voice raspy with age, yet vibrant with memory. "You swore you'd invent an ant-proof blanket." Barry's laugh, a deep, resonant sound that had once been the soundtrack to her youthful joy, filled the air. "And I nearly did, though I think it involved a moat of lemonade. Your mother wasn't too pleased with my sticky hands afterward." He reached out, his hand, gnarled with age but still strong, gently covering hers. Their skin, papery and marked by time, connected, sending a jolt of warmth through Heidi. It was a simple touch, yet it spoke volumes of the decades that had passed and the feelings that stubbornly endured. They walked slowly, Barry's arm a steadying presence at her elbow. "We used to sneak away here, didn't we?" Barry murmured, gazing at the glittering surface of the river, planning our grand escape, convinced the world was ours for the taking. A faint shadow crossed Heidi's face. "We were so young, so terribly, terribly sure." The bittersweet tang of nostalgia was potent, mingling with the fresh understanding of how cruelly fate had intervened. Every shared memory was now tinged with the knowledge of why it had ended, adding layers of sorrow and poignancy. They spoke of the old dance hall, now a modern community center, and the quiet lanes where they'd once walked hand in hand, their whispered secrets carried on the breeze. Each visit to a cherished spot was an excavation, unearthing not just memories, but the raw emotions that had been buried with them. Back in Heidi's cozy living room, surrounded by the scent of lavender and old books, they began to share the tales of their separate lives. Barry spoke of Elaine, his late wife, with quiet respect and genuine affection. She was a good woman, Heidi, kind, steady. We built a good life, raised two wonderful children. He paused, his gaze meeting hers, a profound honesty in his blue eyes. But a part of me, a very deep part, always felt incomplete, like a melody that never found its final chord. Heidi nodded, her own heart aching with recognition. She spoke of Arthur, Veronica's grandfather, her beloved husband. He was my rock, Barry. After you, he taught me how to trust again, how to love again. He was gentle, devoted. Our children, my grandchildren, they are my world. She smiled softly, a tear tracing a path down her cheek. And yet, sometimes, in the quietest hours, I would wonder about the boy who stole my heart first, the one I thought had broken it. They found unexpected parallels in their journeys. Both had built lives based on love and commitment, yet both had carried a silent, unaddressed what-if deep within. They discovered shared joys in their children's successes, similar heartaches in their spouses' passing, and a mutual appreciation for the simple comforts of old age. The intellectual connection that had first drawn them together, the easy banter and shared sense of humor, had not faded. It was simply older, richer, imbued with the wisdom and scars of a lifetime. The rekindling of their feelings was not a sudden explosion, but a gentle, persistent ember, fanned by shared vulnerability and the profound understanding that had blossomed from truth. Barry would often linger a little longer, his hand resting on hers as they talked, his eyes holding hers with an intensity that had not diminished with age. Heidi found herself anticipating his calls, dressing with a little more care, and feeling a lightness in her step that she hadn't realized she'd lost. One evening, after a particularly long and emotionally draining conversation about the years they'd spent apart, Barry took Heidi's hand, his thumb gently stroking her knuckles. "Heidi," he began, his voice soft but firm, "I know we lost a lifetime. And there are moments when the regret is a physical weight." He looked out the window at the fading light of dusk. "But I've come to believe something. Some love stories aren't about the time they missed. They are about the people who were always meant to find their way back." He turned back to her, his eyes shining with a deep conviction. "No matter how long it takes, what's meant to be will always find its way. Our story, it's a testament to that, isn't it? We were meant to find each other again, even if it took 60 years. Heidi listened, her heart a tumultuous mix of emotions. The weight of the past, the pain of the misunderstanding still felt immense. Opening her heart again fully felt like an act of profound vulnerability, terrifying in its scope. She was an old woman set in her ways, her emotional landscape long settled. Could she truly embrace this audacious idea of destiny, of a second chance in her twilight years? But then she looked at Barry, at the unwavering belief in his eyes, at the gentle strength in his hand clasping hers. And she felt it too, stirring beneath the layers of caution and apprehension, a powerful, undeniable resurfacing of the love she had once thought irretrievably lost. It was a different love now, seasoned by life and loss, quieter perhaps, but deeper, richer, and infinitely more precious. Slowly, tentatively, a soft, hopeful smile touched her lips. The ember, long dormant, was beginning to glow with a steady, enduring warmth. The transition from autumn to winter always arrived in Cottonwood Creek with a gentle, decisive quiet. Frost painted the edges of the lace curtains in Grandma Heidi's living room, turning the world outside into a pristine canvas of white, while inside, the fire cracked and danced against the brick hearth. The scent of cinnamon and warm apples remained an anchor, but today it was joined by the rich, deep aroma of freshly ground dark roast coffee, Barry's favorite. Veronica sat at the kitchen island, pretending to be deeply engrossed in a digital marketing strategy on her laptop. In truth, her eyes kept drifting toward the living room window. There, bathed in the soft, milky winter light, sat Heidi and Barry. They were hunched over a heavy, leather-bound scrapbook that Veronica had helped them assemble over the past 2 weeks. It was a bridge made of paper. On the left side of each page were black and white snapshots of Heidi's youth and Arthur's steady, carpentry-lined hands. On the right were color photographs of Barry's late wife, Elaine smiling at country club functions, and Barry's children growing into successful adults. They were merging their ghosts, not out of competition, but out of a profound reverence for the lives that had sustained them when they were lost to each other. "Look at you here, Barry." Heidi's melodic voice drifted into the kitchen, carrying that youthful, unmistakable lilt. She was pointing to a photo of Barry from the mid-1970s, standing proudly in front of a newly expanded Hawthorne Industries factory. "You always did look grand in a tailored suit, even if your hair was getting a bit unruly around the ears." Barry let out that rich, resonant laugh that had once echoed across the Cottonwood Creek Fairgrounds 60 years ago. He leaned in closer, his silver hair brushing against her neatly pinned locks. "I was trying to keep up with the times, my dear, though I suspect Arthur would have told me I was wasting perfectly good fabric. Veronica showed me the photos of the wraparound porch he built for your old house. Now that was master craftsmanship, a man who understood foundations." Heidi's eyes softened, a gentle, tearful smile crinkling the corners of her eyes. She patted Barry's gnarled hand, which rested securely over hers on the page. "He was a wonderful man, Barry. He gave me a beautiful life." "I know he did," Barry murmured, his voice thick with a quiet, unconditional sincerity. "And I am profoundly grateful to him for taking care of the girl I couldn't protect. He loved you the way you deserved to be loved." Veronica felt a lump form in her throat. She looked down at her keyboard, typing random characters just to keep her fingers moving. Witnessing them wasn't just a lesson in romance, it was a masterclass in grace. There was no jealousy between the memories of Arthur and Elaine. Instead, there was only a vast, ocean-like gratitude that they had both been loved, that they had both survived the wreckage of that rainy morning at the train station, and that they had lived long enough to sit together by this fire. Barry closed the scrapbook with a gentle thud, turning his body fully toward Heidi. His intense, kind blue eyes, undimmed by the decades, locked onto hers. "Heidi, the snow is starting to stick to the driveway, and before Veronica forces me to head back to my side of town before the roads freeze, I have something for you." He reached into the breast pocket of his tweed jacket and pulled out a small, rectangular object wrapped in faded, tissue-thin blue paper. Heidi's breath hitched, a faint echo of the 18-year-old girl who used to wait for him behind the old mill. With trembling, papery fingers, she carefully peeled back the paper. Inside lay a heavy, solid brass skeleton key, polished to a brilliant shine, attached to a brand-new leather keychain. Heidi looked up, utterly bewildered. "Barry, what is this?" Barry smiled, a slow, beautiful curve of his lips that erased every wrinkle on his face. "When my father passed away and Hawthorne Industries moved its main offices to the city, the family held onto a few old, derelict pieces of real estate. They called them liabilities, I called them memories. Last month, I bought one of those liabilities back from the corporate board." He took a deep breath, his thumb tracing the back of her hand. "The old train station, Heidi. The town was going to demolish it next spring to build a parking structure. I bought the land and the building." A soft gasp escaped Heidi's lips, her hand flying to her mouth. Veronica stopped typing entirely, her jaw dropping as she looked up from her screen. "It's structurally sound," Barry continued, his voice steady with a youthful, defiant energy. "The roof needs replacing, and the platform has seen better days, but the bones are strong. I've already hired a crew. We are turning it into a community conservatory and local history museum, a place where old stories are kept alive and where new things are allowed to grow in the shelter." He squeezed her hand tightly. "I wanted you to have the first key. I thought perhaps we could walk the grounds together when the spring thaw comes, not to wait for a train that isn't coming, but to look at the garden we are going to plant." Tears, bright and unbidden, tracked paths down Heidi's cheeks, but they were no longer the heavy, bitter tears of abandonment, nor the grieving tears of tragedy. They were clear, joyful, and full of peace. She looked down at the brass key, then up at the boy from the Cottonwood Creek Summer Fair. "A garden," she whispered, her voice overflowing with emotion. "I think I would like to plant some lavender there, Barry, and maybe some white roses." "Anything you want, my love," Barry replied, his voice a soothing, protective murmur. "The whole place is yours, it always should have been." He leaned forward, and Heidi met him halfway. It wasn't the frantic, breathless kiss behind the abandoned mill, nor was it the desperate, stolen embrace under the town square's ancient oak. It was a slow, reverent pressing of lips, a kiss seasoned by 60 years of longing, carrying the weight of 2 entire lifetimes and sealing a quiet promise for whatever days they had left. It was a beautiful, final chord to a melody that had taken a lifetime to find its resolution. Veronica quietly closed her laptop. She stood up, her heart full to bursting, and slipped her smartphone into her back pocket. She grabbed her coat from the rack by the door, catching her grandmother's eye. Heidi gave her a subtle, deeply loving nod, a silent thank you from the digital detective's most important client. "I'm going to run to the market before the snow gets heavy, Granny," Veronica called out softly, her voice bright. "Don't let Barry burn the cookies if he tries to help in the kitchen." "Drive safely, my dear," Heidi called back, her hand firmly intertwined with Barry's as they both looked out at the falling snow. As Veronica stepped out onto the porch, the faint chime of bells announced her departure. The winter air was biting and crisp, but as she looked back through the window and saw the two silver-haired figures silhouetted against the warm, golden glow of the hearth, she didn't feel the cold at all. The past was no longer a silent, painful whisper in the attic. It was outside in the open, fully written, beautifully redeemed, and bathed in the radiant, enduring light of a love that had simply refused to die. The end.